Hello everybody, I'm John. This is the Midnight Paint and Body channel. In this video I'm going to just take you guys through the very basics, start to finish, of a small auto body repair and paint. So I have had a few requests, guys. I've had a few people ask if I could just do just the basics, like if you're an absolute beginner and wanting to do a little bit of auto body work, just to kind of go through the steps of a basic repair. So I got this little job in this week and it's kind of a perfect one. So I don't even remember what year it is, 2011, something like that. Really nice clean little Chevy truck, really nice shape actually. So what we're fixing on it is just this dent in the fender. So I'm gonna get in there so you guys can see it. Hard to pick up, white on the camera, but a pretty good little dent there. And so it's a little bit high here from being kind of pushed. I'd say it was kind of pushed that way. It's moved the metal up there a little bit, but that's an easy repair. We're gonna do that. So I figured I will take you guys through the steps of just the small dent repair, body filler, primer, prepping, and paint, and we'll just kind of blast through it. I'll try and make it quick. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to do a quick little bit of tear down on this thing. I'm going to pull the door handle, the mirror, and the mud flap. The reason I am pulling stuff off the door, even though this is just white, when we get into something like this that is so close to the adjoining panel, it is better, in my opinion, just as someone that's been a painter his whole life, just to go ahead and do the blend panel. Chances are we could match this color up sufficiently, but to just blend the adjoining panel, it just takes a little bit of guesswork out of it, and it just ensures that it's going to be right the first time. So I'll explain that a little more later. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and tear this down a little bit, and then I'll bring you guys back and we'll start repairing that dent. Okay, so we're going to start prepping our little dent up here for filler. So like I said, the metal is definitely high through here. We're not going to tap that down yet. We're going to pull this dent out a little bit, and we'll get to that in a minute. So first thing, if you're going to be applying body filler, you need good clean metal. You want your metal to be kind of prepped up with something fairly coarse. Now this is a 36 grit disc on my little grinder. Doesn't have to be that coarse. If you've got like even a good 80 grit tooth in the metal, body filler will adhere to that. More on that in a minute. So we've got our dent cleaned off, so what we're going to do here next, now I'm going to use a stud gun or pin welder, and we're going to pull this dent out a little bit. Now obviously, if you're just learning, you're not going to own one of these. There's always a way to get in behind. I bet if I pulled this inner liner out, there would be a hole in there somewhere that I could get a pick bar in and work this dent out. Because I own this tool, I'm going to use it. Also, this isn't a big dent. This wouldn't be too much to just fill. If you were going to just fill this dent, you would have to hammer down this high spot that's around the edge where the metal is moved out. You know, you get rid of that high spot, you could definitely just fill that. Again, I own the tool. I'm going to pull it out a little nicer. So these things are pretty basic. small welder. And it welds those copper pins or brass pins, whatever they are, right to the panel. Now you don't want to just, if you got a bigger dent, you don't want to just put a pin in the middle and start trying to slam the thing out. Like anything, you need to work it out. Well, we're just going to bump this guy out a little bit here. If I can tighten it. And now, like I said, there's a high spot here, so I got a little pressure on the dent. And I'll tap down my high spot. And obviously you don't want to pull too far and create a high spot with this thing. So there we are, that dent is pretty much all out. I just got to grab a snipper to cut those off. So I've seen guys use pliers and just kind of work these a little bit and pop the pins right off the metal. You're really risking blowing a hole in the metal doing that. I prefer to cut them off and grind the heads off. There we are, ready for body filler. So I'm just gonna go mix up a little bit of filler. We're just gonna smooth off this dent a bit. It's not much at all. It's barely a dent anymore, but it still needs to be leveled off. Now this is going to bring us to another, I'm gonna drop my light, common misconception, I'm gonna say. I even did a video on this, but honestly the video wasn't great. It didn't work out the way I wanted. But you're gonna hear guys say that you have to prime before using body filler. That is not true. This is ready for filler. This is cleaned off, it's ground off, it's clean. If this was gonna sit, if I wasn't gonna put filler on this until next week, I could throw a coat of epoxy primer over this to seal it up and then just scuff it and put some filler on next week. Or I could just take my little grinder and just clean the metal off real quick and put my filler on. Now, body fillers, everyone I've ever used, if you read the can, is designed to go direct to metal. That is what they're designed for. That's how the chemists made them. I don't know where that came from, these guys all saying that you have to epoxy. You absolutely have to epoxy before applying body filler. Now guys, I've been doing bodywork 35 years. That doesn't make me any better than anyone else. It doesn't make me great at anything, but it doesn't mean I've seen a lot of things. I've worked on these old cars, this old stuff. Actually, if you watch this video on the 77 Ford I'm working on, I mean, this thing had bodywork done, I'm guessing it had to be in the 80s when it was painted, and it had body filler all over the place over bare metal. The metal is still perfectly fine below the body filler. So I'm not sure where that comes from. If you are working on something like this, a large restoration job that is going to be sitting in bare metal for an extended period, like this one, absolutely. Epoxy prime it, and then it's sealed up, and then as you do your body work, you scuff your epoxy, you put your filler over top of your epoxy. It's not that there's anything wrong with it, it's just not necessary. Kind of necessary on something like this. I am actually planning on doing that on this car, but I still need to sandblast the underside, and I figured I'm going to sandblast the outside again before I start my body work on it. What you see there is just some short strand Everglass filler over the areas where I've welded panels in. But you see, this is the reason you would epoxy prior to doing your bodywork, so you can see how all these pits have started to fill up with rust again. Had I epoxied this right when I sandblasted it, that would be fine, but I know it's going back outside for a whole bunch more sandblasting, and I'm going to dust the outside again before doing bodywork. But just a quick explanation on that, or my understanding, the way I do it. Now, everyone has their own way of doing things. I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy that does auto body. I'm just telling you my way of doing things. Not saying it's the right way. So anyway, I'm gonna mix up a little filler and we'll be back. So on to a little bit of filler here. Obviously the smoother you can put it on, the less sanding you're gonna have. One piece of advice I would give, always fill big. You know, your dent might be small, but feather it out and fill quite a bit bigger than the dent. And then as you level that all off with the block, it's going to come out nicer. So now this is another thing, another one of those, everyone does things differently. The way I do body filler, the way I've always done it, is to never have your body filler on the paint. This will all be feathered back nicely, so there's a nice ring of metal around my repair. Again, guys, this is just an experience thing. Anytime you see a ring around the repair where it kind of wrinkles up just a tiny bit around your repair with the expansion, contraction, the heat and the cold, you know, sitting out in the sun. Anytime I've seen that and dug into a repair, because I've worked on a lot of cars, usually what I find is somebody has put their body filler onto the paint. A lot of guys do it. I mean, collision shops that are just jobs in and out that they're not going to see again, they don't really care. I always like to have that ring of metal, and then I'll have either some etch primer or some epoxy primer sealing it up, a couple coats of high build primer, but we'll get to that later too. But again, guys, just the way I do things, it's the way has always worked for me, and it is what I have always seen is what causes that halo around a repair, is having filler onto paint. So our little bit of body filler has been sitting for about 15 minutes. So I've just got a small sanding block with some 80 grit. This is kind of a finer 80. Sometimes 80 would be too coarse. They're all a little different. But I'm just going to use that to knock the initial filler off. I will probably fast forward this part. So always use your feel, guys. That's the most important thing. Remember, if you can feel it, you're gonna see it. quick, yeah, need a fitting on that one. A quick feather with some 120. And that is ready for primer. Well, not quite ready for primer. I'm gonna feather everything back a little farther, probably with some 320 grit, and then we're gonna mask this up. We're gonna get some primer on it. So we're all masked up, ready for some primer. So in this case, because it's just a small area, I'm just gonna use a little bit of aerosol etching primer for our bare metal. Now, if this was down low where rocks were hitting it and stuff, I would definitely use an epoxy primer before the high build. A few different ways you can do this. You can do an etch primer in your high build, you can do an epoxy primer and then your high build, or if you're using a direct to metal high build primer, you could prime that without an etch primer. I'm always leery of that stuff. I don't know how good it is. I'd rather use an etch primer or an epoxy primer first, just so I know. I think a lot of guys use it with no problems. I'm just not familiar enough with it to have an opinion. So I just kind of do what I know in this case. So we don't need much of this at all. We just want to get some of that acid etch primer on the bare metal. So now I'm going to go mix up a little bit of urethane high build in the gun, and we'll give that a couple of coats. So that'll get 2 more coats like that, and then I will probably throw a heat lamp on it, and probably by after lunch today we'll be prepping this up for paint. Well, it's been a few hours. I have had heat on the primer, so this is all ready to prep. There is another spot here. I noticed there was a little dent kind of under the mirror area. I just decided, since I'm blending that door, I decided just to go ahead and fix it. So rather than blending over it. So our block sanding portion, obviously straightforward. I've just got some 220 grit, just a half a sheet of sandpaper. And use a small block because it's a small area. And of course, blocking just is what it sounds like. Just sanding out your primer with a nice flat block to get a nice flat straight repair. You don't want to use a lot of pressure with your sandpaper. You want your sandpaper to do the work. And as with any repairs, just always use your feel. You might be able to feel that, okay, I've got a little bit of a low through there. I can feel that. So as I block that down, I'm taking down the high areas that are around that low spot to where you can't feel it anymore. So I'm basically just going to block this down a bit with 220, and then I will probably switch to a 320 and then just 400 grit by hand to finish it off, and it'll be ready to paint. So now our primer areas are prepped up. So I blocked them with 220. I ran the machine over nice and flat with some 320 grit, and then I've hand sanded everything with 400. Again, you keep checking and make sure it feels good. Yeah, everything is bang on. So this is where we start prepping for our blends. Now, the reason we use base coat, clear coat paints is for their blending abilities. Now, if I hadn't repaired on this door, this would be a blend panel. Meaning that I would paint there and then clear coat everything. In this case, I'm just painting out a little farther. So our paint is only covering our repairs. So any of these little chips that are up around the edges, I'm not feathering all those out because I'm not painting right up to the edge. The idea is we're going to maintain our factory color match between this fender and this hood. And this, you know, the same back here. Door to door, this is still going to be the factory color match because I'm only putting paint here. The rest of the panel will be clear coated, so it's going to be all uniform. And in the end, what we're going for is an invisible repair. You know, this brings me back to something that I have heard a lot over the years. Like, you know, someone will get their car back from a collision shop from having a fender bender and say this is it. They'll be like, well, they fixed this, but, you know, I got it back and it's still got chips up here. Well, for one thing, that's not what the shop or myself or whoever is getting paid for. You know, I've done an estimate to fix this dent, not to feather out all these other chips and completely paint everything. And I don't want to anyway, because I want to be able to blend and maintain my factory color match. So, hopefully that puts that into perspective a little bit. So basically all I'm going to be doing to prep up the rest of this panel, 800 grit by hand. I'm going to sand everything down until it's dull. We've kind of sanded down the orange peel, and basically from there we're ready for paint. Now you're going to get guys who say, oh, you're going to put finger tracks in sanding like that. That's not a concern. This is 800 grit. If I was doing that with, you know, this piece of 120 grit, then yeah, I'd be digging trenches in there with my fingers if I was sanding like that. But this is so fine, all I'm doing is sanding that top layer. You'd have to sand for an awful long time before you actually put finger tracks in with that. So once this is all sanded with 800 grit, that portion of the panel is ready just for clear coat. So I'm going to continue on doing that. I'm going to sand all the rest of both of these panels with 800, and then I'll take a gray Scotch-Brite pad and just kind of smooth everything over one last time. Really, that's just ensures that you're really getting into your edges, and it just kind of blends everything in nice. It's really nice to be able to get in and make sure those edges are sanded perfectly. If you're ever going to have chipping, peeling, paint, or clear coat, it's going to come from these edges if you don't sand them properly. You know, especially like areas like this, make sure all this kind of stuff is sanded really well. You know, in these grooves here, this door handle fills most of this, but if you don't sand this, that's going to eventually flake and peel away. So anyway, I'm going to finish up my sanding, and I guess, yeah, I'll do that, and then we're going to take this thing around to the paint booth after I move some stuff around, and we'll get her masked up for paint. So I've jumped ahead a little bit here, guys. I've got the truck masked up in the paint booth, ready to wash down and paint. A little bit noisy, I got my paint mixer running through there. So just some wax and grease remover at this point. Just like Mr. Miyagi. Wax on, wax off. So you see some guys doing this with a spray bottle, spraying it on and wiping it off. The correct way to do it is wet cloth to dry cloth. That way you're taking a lot of stuff off with the wet one, and you're getting the rest of it with the dry one. Alright, so there we are. So let's go mix some paint. Now let's kind of set the camera up here, so I'm going to give you guys an idea what goes into these colors. So this is of course just white. Alrighty. So our first toner in our white is actually gold, which is green, by the way. I'm trying to see if I can set up the camera so you guys can kind of see what goes into this. If you can see in there. Alright, so next we have red oxide. And then we have blue. And 87. Now we have black. And now we'll add some white. And then we just have a clear binder. And there we have it, GMWA 8624. So this is reduced 100% with reducer, and then it's sprayable. So our final step is a wipe down with a tack cloth. And now we're ready to spray. So wait 10 minutes, we'll give those areas 2 more coats of paint, and then it'll be clear coat. Well, that's 3 coats of paint on the truck. We are ready for 2 coats of clear coat. Give that 5 minutes and hit it one more time. right, all done. In the morning, we'll throw her back together and it'll be ready for the customer. Well, there it is, all put back together, ready to go home to the customer. So, just a quick little job there, guys. I just thought it might be helpful for, like I said, a few folks have asked for just the kind of basic start to finish. So, if this is what you're after, just a quick little dent repair and you know, all the steps and stages to completion, there it is. So, obviously this is our repair area right here. We had that dent right there, and there was also a dent here that I just fixed up for the customer as well. So everything turned out good, color is good, repair looks good, and yeah, it's such a nice clean little truck, definitely worth fixing that little dent. So as always, guys, if you haven't already, do me a favor and just push the subscribe and the share and all that YouTube stuff that YouTube people are always asking you to do. So, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you come back and check out the next one.